Apparently there's a lot of people who really dislike Dottore, and a lot of these people are acting like he's the reincarnation of Epstein or something, but most people simply don't understand him. In fact, I would argue that Dottore might be the best villain we've ever had in the history of Genshin, and he's not as evil as it seems. And I'm not saying this just to glaze him. Dottore genuinely is the most well-written antagonist we've ever had, and we might never get someone like him ever again. I know this is a very controversial take, so let me explain why Dottore is not as evil as a lot of you guys think, and why he's the best antagonist in the entire game. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, why do people dislike him so much, and why do people consider him evil? Well, mainly because he's very selfish, he sacrifices others for the sake of his experiments, and he's the reason why a lot of people had to suffer. Those are like the main reasons why people don't like him. And at first you might say, wow, this guy is a really bad person, of course I'm not gonna like him. But this is where you guys fail to understand his character. Now let me explain why that is, but I warn you, we're about to get really philosophical and we're about to go through some really difficult and mentally challenging questions, so we will have to activate every single brain cell and listen very carefully. Do not watch this if you're not willing to try and understand another character's perspective. I don't want anybody in the comments saying that I support Dottore's actions or anything like that. I'm simply explaining him as a character from a philosophical standpoint so that you guys can understand him better. But now, let's get into it. In order for us to understand why Dottore is acting the way he is and why it's not necessarily wrong from a philosophical standpoint, we have to go back to the Archon quest and revisit some of the things he said. At the end of Act 7, Dottore shows the Traveler a false reality that he created using his powers, in which everything is perfect and everyone gets to live a peaceful life, which technically isn't necessarily evil. If anything, it could actually be very helpful.
Is this not a beautiful city? People live in peace and find joy in their work. The streets are safe. People can even leave their doors unlocked at night. You might say it is the Elysium everyone dreams of. All available data indicates your values and worldview conform with the mainstream. This kind of society should be quite to your taste.
False beauty is deceitful. Lies are to no one's taste.
However, the Traveler responds saying that it's false beauty and it's something nobody would ever want, without providing any actual counter-argument beyond that. And then Dottore proceeds to ask her something really interesting.
I wonder, is it your moral standards that are too high, or your expectations of reality? Answer me this. If someone existed in a sweet dream from the moment they were born, a dream in which they never once felt pain, which do you think they would consider superior? The dream or the reality?
That's pure sophistry. It has nothing to do with your actions.
Once again, the Traveler is unable to answer the question and instead calls it sophistry, to which Dottore answers with a very important fact.
As I suspected. You have yet to understand all of this for what it really is.
Now, the reason why this moment is so interesting is because it tells us that we don't know why Dottore is doing all this in the first place. What if he's doing it to help humanity in the end? If the Traveler calls it sophistry, which essentially means she thinks Dottore is trying to deceive her by showing her all this, and Dottore responds saying that she doesn't understand what all of this is for, it indicates that this false reality isn't, just something he created to manipulate the Traveler, but rather something that he actually had in mind. And a false reality in which everything is peaceful isn't evil at all. If anything, it shows that he's at least somewhat interested in making the world a better place. Now, whether it's a false reality or not, fact is, living in this false reality wouldn't hurt anyone, and it would be way less painful than having to live in the real world. But let me ask you this. Imagine there's someone who lives in horrific pain every single day. Do you think that person would prefer to live in this infinitely painful reality, or in a false reality where they don't feel any pain at all? If a false reality can give you everything you want, Why is it wrong for somebody to live that way? He wouldn't be interested in creating something like this if he was truly evil. You could make the argument that Dottore is only doing this to manipulate the traveler, but I don't think so, because during this dialogue, he also makes it very clear that he doesn't view her as an opponent, and he offers her to work with him based on the argument that not all of her friendships rely on having the same ideals, and a lot of them rely on being beneficial to both sides, which technically isn't wrong. Later on, he goes on to say something really important once again.
You know, I heard recently that a group of critics reviewed countless stories and drew an interesting conclusion. They found that it is more often than not the villains who strive tirelessly to push the boundaries of progress. Fanatics are trampled down for their transgressions, and those who transcend are rebuked for their audacity. And so, the majority of creatures are too timid to follow my lead. But all sacrifices made during my experiments have been worthwhile, as you can now see. I can offer you something new, something unique, precisely because I am a villain.
He acknowledges that without villains like him, the world wouldn't be able to progress. He's kind of talking like some Reddit mod in this dialogue, but essentially what he's trying to say there is that the only way to progress is by becoming a villain, since it's impossible to progress if you refuse to go beyond the limits of the norm. So what he means by that is that without people like him, humanity would be stuck and would eventually go extinct anyway. In order to progress, someone has to be willing to make sacrifices. After that, Dottore says something that explains his character really well and essentially justifies his way of thinking. Listen carefully to what he says.
We are eternally bound through mutual interest. Can you truly say you would never turn to malice if it could give you the life you dream of?
We're completely different. I embrace everything that life throws at me. I am engaged in every step of my journey.
How does that make us different? I too embrace what life brings, researching everything that interests me.
Just like to most people, their friends and family are everything, to him, research and experiments are everything. The Traveler, for example, she took the lives of countless of opponents in order to find her brother. She canonically took the lives of countless treasure hunters, Fatui soldiers, people from the desert, and much more. The game, of course, doesn't explicitly say that she took their lives, but if you're in an Archon quest and you have to defeat enemies who disappear after you defeat them, it's pretty obvious what that symbolizes, and it's pretty obvious that she eliminated them. Whether she had her reasons or not, she harmed others for the sake of her own goals. So why is it fine for her to do whatever she wants in order to get back to her brother, but not for Dottore? Everyone has to make sacrifices to achieve their dreams. Why is it suddenly wrong for Dottore to harm others for the sake of his goal, but not for Lumine? Fact is, the answer to that is subjective, and just because my subjective opinion might be different than his, that doesn't make it right or wrong. You cannot apply your own understanding of morality to another person if they have a different understanding of morality than you do. This is what Dottore is trying to explain to us. But going back to the dialogue between Dottore and the Traveler, the most interesting part about this whole section is when he offers her to give her all the answers she wants and bring her back to her brother.
I know what your ultimate goal is. You wish to walk the path your brother walked and seek answers from him at the end of that journey, don't you?
Someone like you could never understand what it feels like to care about another person the way I care about him.
But that doesn't mean I can't help. I could find your brother right now, bring him before you, and make him give you the answers you seek.
She knows that nobody truly understands her and that nobody will be able to help her except for him, and yet she decides to refuse. To me, this doesn't really make any sense, especially since she acknowledges how nobody ever tried to help her except for Dottore, and I'm pretty sure they had to do this for the sake of the story. But I don't know, I think it's pretty unrealistic that Lumine doesn't even consider it. She doesn't even try to cooperate with him at all. I think that's pretty unrealistic. Anyway, when going back to their dialogue at the beginning of the last act, Dottore states another fact that's very significant when it comes to understanding who he is and why he thinks the way he does.
I wonder if you don't understand humans all that well. They are very pragmatic creatures who understand only that which they can perceive with their senses. If I had you sit here for a week, I imagine people might sympathize. But if I left you here for 100, 1,000, or 10,000 years, the sheer size of that number would cause it to lose all meaning to them. They would not have the capacity to comprehend your suffering, and thus they could not empathize. Their lifespans are so limited, their bodies so fragile. Did you ever really hope that they could begin to understand someone like you? Your long life and unique origins make you fundamentally different from them. How long will it be before they start to treat you like the alien you are? Before you are ostracized, outcast?
We as humans cannot comprehend something we haven't seen or experienced yet. It's impossible. This is why things like empathy don't really make any sense for him. If other humans are unable to understand how you feel, what's the point of even trying to find someone who understands you? What's the point of trying to fit in if your ideas are beyond their understanding? If Lumine wasn't as powerful as she is and she didn't look human, there's a good chance people would treat her differently and treat her more like an alien. Lumine is very well aware of that, just like she is aware of the fact that even though she always helped others, she never actually got rewarded for it. So everything Dottore is stating there is simply the truth. And finally, the most important part about this section is when Dottore offers the traveler a life of complete freedom to the point where she would be allowed to harm others without any consequences and without being held accountable.
Believe me, such a life is but one small step away.
Why would you offer me that?
The creation of a world is the ultimate scientific experiment. I have taken my research to the highest level, where I shall be not just a god, but also a servant to many sacred spirits. I shall heed the truth and perform holy deeds. A god's laboratory is the perfect playground.
Dottore not only says that he wants to be a servant to sacred spirits, but also that he wants to perform holy deeds, and this is what really caught my attention. Holy deeds, by definition, are morally righteous actions, so if Dottore wants to perform holy deeds in this new world, it would mean that he wants to bring some sort of justice or peace to this new world, which once again proves that Dottore isn't necessarily just evil. Anyway, by this point, you might wonder, why am I showing you guys all this? Why is all of this so important, and why do I keep glazing Dottore so much? Well, as I said at the start of the video, a lot of you guys don't understand him and what he represents. Many people think that Dottore is just an evil psychopath with no emotions at all, or that he's a bad character overall because of the things he does. But if you genuinely think that, you simply fail to comprehend what he's talking about and what he represents. First of all, he does have emotions and he's not completely emotionless, even though a lot of people seem to think that. In these dialogues, for example, he even mentions that he can get angry and that he feels bad for her. So clearly, he does have feelings, except he has a different perception of them compared to everyone else, as he explained to us multiple times. And this is one of the things that make him so unique. But now let me explain what he represents as a character and why it's so hard to understand. Once again, this will be mentally challenging, so only watch this if you're ready for some very difficult concepts. In my opinion, Dottore mainly represents two things: perspective and selfishness. Let me start with perspective. The reason why I chose it is because the more we talk to Dottore, the more we learn about how subjective good and evil are depending on one's perspective. For example, from a thief's perspective, robbing another person might feel like the right thing to do. What if they desperately need money to save somebody's life? But from the perspective of the victim who's getting robbed, it will feel absolutely terrible and not good at all. Now, I'm not saying robbery is good or that it should be encouraged, of course not. But the question is, whose perspective matters more? The perspective of the robber who really needed that money, or the victim who just got robbed? Whose perspective matters more and why? The truth is, there is no definitive answer. It's completely subjective. The same goes for Dottore and the Traveler. Both of them have their own reasons for the way they act, And as Dottore explained, it's impossible for us to fully comprehend another person's perspective. From a logical standpoint, it's impossible to say if one person is truly worse than the other. You can say that one person is a threat or that this person is dangerous, but it's physically impossible to determine if one person is truly good or bad. And this is one of the things we can learn from Dottore. Before you judge another person, keep in mind that they're fundamentally different from you and you never know why they act a certain way. A great lesson from Dottore right there. Also, before we move on, another thing that we have to keep in mind when it comes to perspective, especially in this case, is that Dottore never really had a home and he was also kicked out of the academia, so these things probably had a huge factor in Dottore's evolution. But how does Dottore represent selfishness? Well, first of all, he obviously prioritizes his own goals and his research above everything and everyone else. It's very obvious, but the question is selfishness even a bad thing? If so, then why? Interestingly, Dottore, who many would consider the most selfish person, is also the only person who actually understood the traveler and offered to give her everything she ever wanted. Now obviously, he did that out of selfishness to convince the traveler to join him, but still, despite the fact that he was acting out of pure selfishness, he was able to give the traveler what no one else could. So if his selfishness allows him to give the traveler something that no one else was able to give her, is selfishness really that bad? If it wasn't for his selfishness, he wouldn't have been able to create a painless false reality, nor to give the traveler what she was always asking for. And this is why Dottore represents selfishness. Whenever we look at Dottore and his interactions, it forces us to think about things like that. But now that we know what he represents, let me explain why all of these things make him such a perfect antagonist compared to everyone else. To start with, unlike all the previous antagonists, it's really hard to say if Dottore is truly evil or not. There is a big difference between doing something out of hatred and doing something out of passion. Dottore is not doing all of this because he likes to harm others or because he wants to harm people. He simply does it for the sake of his research, which means everything to him. And it's impossible for us to truly judge him if we don't even know his end goal. What if he's sacrificing thousands of lives to save millions? What if his plan is to save humanity? We have no clue about that. With all the previous antagonists, it was a completely different story. With characters like Arlecchino, Capitano, or even Tartaglia, they had a pretty clear mindset, and they all seemed evil at first on the outside, but once we met them in person, it turned out they're actually pretty friendly, and they're not as evil as we thought. With Dottore, however, we don't really know what his ultimate end goal is, nor do we have a clear picture of his feelings, since Dottore has a completely different view on morality than all the other characters. And that aside, apart from Rerir, he's the only villain that constantly raises valid questions and genuinely makes you think. For example, if Dottore actually were to become the new god, would it really be that bad? Because at least in Teyvat, the gods are not all loving or all forgiving. They just do whatever they want. There's still a lot of crisis and a lot of people suffering either way. If Dottore wants to fix that by providing a false reality in which there is no pain, why shouldn't Dottore become a god himself? The entire cast of characters is constantly so mad about the idea of Dottore becoming a god, but do they even know why? If you truly think about this, what's so wrong with a mortal trying to become a god? What's so different between Dottore and the gods if both of them are equally as evil and selfish? The current gods of Teyvat are certainly not any better than Dottore. Anyway, the point is, Dottore was asking countless valid and thought-provoking questions, which is something we haven't really seen before. Who decides what's right and wrong? How far are you willing to go to achieve your dreams? At what point does ambition cross a line? Is there even a line you shouldn't cross? And if so, then why? I could go on and on about Dottore and all these things, but overall, he's a philosophical masterpiece of a character, and we probably won't see a character like that again in the near future. But with that being said, if you watched this entire video, I want to give you something back, so comment your UID and your server. The first 3 comments with their UID and server will get a free welcome from me as a thank you. Let me know what you guys think about Dottore down below in the comments, and as always, I wish everyone a nice and wonderful day.